I don't know, man. I don't know anything. Forgive me. I mean, we'll talk about it. One of the students yesterday in class asked about if we could talk about humility. And it stayed with me. In fact, I couldn't sleep last night because my approach to it was so infantile, so remarkably shallow and just ridiculous. But I'm sorry, what was your question? Vulnerability. Yeah? There was a movie some years ago with Al Pacino and Michelle Pfeiffer, and it's not Scarface. It's Frankie and Johnny, I think. And we mentioned this movie before in the class, but Al Pacino had served some time. He begins to work in this coffee shop where Michelle Pfeiffer is a waitress. Long story short, they begin to date, they begin to like each other, and either she is at his place or he is at her place. They're brushing their teeth and they're having some conversation about Palestine and Israel, joking, of course. And he looks at her and says, "This robe, you take off your clothes." And she doesn't understand. She doesn't know why he's asking. So irrelevant. And she says, "Why?" "I don't have a reason. I just want you to disrobe." And after some back and forth, he looks at her and says, "I just want to know, or want to see that you're comfortable enough that when I ask you to disrobe, to just disrobe. I have no ill intentions." And this is not like a 20-year-old who's never been in a relationship. She's like a 30 or a 40-year-old who's been around, who's, I suppose, experienced a good amount of hurt and pain. And like most of us in this classroom, if your first marriage didn't go well or the second marriage didn't go well, you don't walk into the third one easily. You take one step forward and 50 back. And eventually she does. Your question, very much like the question that someone asked yesterday in class about humility, is layered. There was another movie called "So This Is What It Means to Be 40," I think. It may be the wrong title of the movie, but Assalamu alaikum. Forget that. That's you don't have children, do you? Don't ever have it. When they're kids and you gotta change them all the time. Of course, when they're like a few months old to maybe a year and a half, it's okay. But at a certain point, they become a bit more mature, a bit more independent. They can do things on their own for the most part. And so they're like 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 or 20. They look at you and say, "Dad, can you walk to the bathroom with me?" "Okay." "Dad, can you wipe my behind?" "Okay." And there is not a hint of shame or guilt or embarrassment. They don't categorize it as evil or awful or none of those things. They kind of just bend over and you take this wipe and you just go at it. And they're completely open. And again, without any elements of shame. So when you talk about being vulnerable, and I have problems or difficulties pronouncing that word the right way, but something must have happened to you where you have built a wall and you don't allow too many people in, and you yourself don't go out very often. And just in case someone wants to get a little too close to you, perhaps be a bit more intimate with you, you kind of go back in time and you remember all the times you were open, i.e. vulnerable, and how you were betrayed, how you got backstabbed and all that. And so it's very difficult for you to open up. So you can't talk about vulnerability without talking about something that must have took place in the past that makes you or forces you to be closed off. I always go back to my experience with the people who went to AA across the street from us at the car wash. It takes a long time for you to come out and say, I am an alcoholic. For the longest time, you hide a bottle here, you hide a bottle there, you drink in private. And just before you go home, you drink like 5 buckets of coffee. And you hope, at least you pray that when you go home, you don't act, all crazy. And just in case someone calls you out, you say, no, I just had like a glass or a can or something. And then after like a lot of back and forth, you say, yeah, I went to the bar. I was there from 10 in the morning till like midnight. But when you get caught, there is so much shame and your responsibility to yourself, to your family, to your parents, everything goes down the drain. And there comes a point where you get really, really depressed. And when someone calls you out or recognizes certain things about the way your eyes look, that they have a tendency of being a bit more yellow than usual, for example. They say, oh, you used to be A, B, C, D, and you say, yeah. And, what happens is after a while, you say, I can't do this on my own, and so you join the center. And it's your turn, and it's your first time in front of all these strangers to say, my name is Amir Sabzevari, I'm an alcoholic. Prior to this point, I was just a social drinker. No, I just don't drink, period. And it takes you some time to kind of just embrace the fact. But when you look at the space, you realize there are 5 other people or 10 other people who share the same exact psychological, emotional space with you, that it started casually, or maybe it was a way for you to kind of deal with just the difficulties of life. And life is difficult, and we don't really have all the tools needed to kind of combat all the viciousness of life. And so the first time you stand up and say, I'm Amir Sabzevari and I'm an alcoholic, you don't really know how you're going to deal with it, how other people are going to deal with it, how you're going to judge yourself, how other people are going to judge you, and how you're going to be afterwards when the meeting is over. But it takes some time to adjust. And then little by little, you're able to open up. But you open up only to the people you've grown to intimacy. You've seen them every single day for the past 2 years. And for the first time now you come out and say, yes, I drink because of A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. Now everybody knows your biography and you trust them. And that's one of the things. There's a reason why you open up to these people after having spent a good amount of time, and then you create history. And you realize that none of the people in your group is betraying you, causing you pain, backstabbing you. You grow in that trust and faith. And then you just come out and say, yeah, A, B, C, D. And you know that other people are in the same position, or at least have tasted some of it. But you only open up to that particular group, and only from, say, 6 at night to about 9 p.m., where you guys it's like your confessional booth. You don't need God, you don't need Jesus Christ. That people, that space, that's your church right there. And then the 12-step program is very much like the 10 Commandments, or it's very much like the Beatitudes in the Gospel of Matthew. That it takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of awareness, and it takes a lot of shame and a lot of self-punishment to be able to recognize, be able to see the past, and then embrace the past, and then work with all the emotions that the past creates inside you, and make sure that doesn't leak out to your wife or husband or parents or friends, your work, classes you have to take. And then there comes a point where you truly understand. And I don't know what the timetable is. Everybody works at a different pace. And some people are not very lucky. And some people are lucky. One of the best, I think, interviews you will ever, I think, encounter about someone who had this particular addiction was Richard Burton. He had an interview with Dick Cavett, I think, and he talks about alcoholism in such a poetic way. It surpasses what Robin Williams. I mean, Robin Williams, is great, but there is, because Burton is English and because of, I suppose, the way he pronounces words and because of the poetic language, it's a very, very moving and powerful scene, just for 10 minutes.
Richard Burton on the Dick Cavett show?
Yeah. It's beautiful. Maybe if any of you, don't forget, you can maybe post it for the rest of us. And then once, I suppose, you kind of understand your past, understand the reasons as to why you walk towards a bottle or anything that causes addiction, it's the understanding that builds confidence about you. Your moments of repentance, those things are gone. You don't need to ask for forgiveness because understanding will allow you to forgive yourself. And that's the beauty of it. And not only is your body is now experiencing sobriety, but you're also experiencing sobriety of emotions, sobriety of, I suppose, thoughtfulness. And you watch, for example, you go to a gathering. Let's say you come to this class, and no one really knows you, but you just see that someone just keeps playing with their phone or playing video games or texting or whatever the case may be, and you look at them. You don't even know them. And you say to them, I want to tell you about an addiction I once had. And it's always in the background, like a shadow following me, but I'm very aware of it. My friends and I would go out and we would just goof around, and then we would end up in the bar. And once in a while, the conversations or my past would become heavy, and I would drink a bit too much. And then it got more and more and more and more until one morning I woke up and I realized the first thing I want to do, not brush my teeth, not take a shower, but have a beer. And that's when I realized I'm an alcoholic, or I'm in this cage, in this prison system. I'm enslaved to this particular thing. And you sit back and you say, why would someone share something so private in public? In front of people they don't know. That you're so open, and your openness really has to do not because you're an idiot, not because you're foolish. It's because you were enslaved to something, you didn't come out, you got caught, you were filled with shame and guilt and remorse and repentance. Your wife forgave you, but you never forgave yourself. There came a point where you matured enough to forgive yourself, and you didn't from that point on care. It's kind of like Matthew Perry. He had an interview with some guy who was very gung-ho about, you have the free will to change your life, and you have the free will to do this, and you have the free will to do that. And Matthew Perry, said to him, yes, I did have the free will to go to the party, and I did have the free will to pick up this glass and drink. But after the fifth or the sixth or the seventh drink, there was no free will left in me. I was held hostage by this thing, alcohol or whatever. So, there are two kinds of, I suppose, openness or vulnerability. You understand your past, you understand why you did some of the things that you did, and you were able to make peace with it. And then you come out and you're very sincere, you're very honest. And there is something about us that recognizes honesty and sincerity about people, and I don't know what it is. And the thing is, it usually takes a while to get there. Again, remember, you don't have to be vulnerable if there is no pain inside you. You know, the first relationship you ever walk into, you're very open and you give it 110%. The second, you give it 75%. The third relationship, you give it 50%. The fourth relationship, you give it 10%. You keep 90% of yourself to yourself. And you say, I'm going to go into this relationship, I'm going to give this person 10% of who and what I am. And if they hurt me, it's only 10%. I'll have, a night filled with tears for maybe, a few hours, and then, I'll wake up and things will be okay. But I suppose if your question would be, how does one become vulnerable? Good morning, Anna. Good morning. When I went back home some 20 years ago, I went there with a friend of mine, and my friend went back home to find himself a wife. And we went to visit my uncle, and he looks at my friend and says, can't you find a companion for yourself in America? Yeah, but I want a traditional woman, my friend said. Said, Iran, the social, the political forces of Iran cages people. They're emotionally repressed intensely. Women want to do a lot of things, but socially they can't. So you want to find yourself a companion from this repressed society. You want to take them to America and give them freedom. They're going to be running wild. And it'll be very difficult for you to control them. It'll be very difficult for you to understand why they are the way they are. And there's a good chance that eventually you leave them or they'll leave you. Okay. If you have had an experience, unpleasant, negative experience, and because you live in society and you need to kind of keep up with some decorum, the truth is you have to repress these emotions. You're no different than a Persian. And again, depending on what it is that you've experienced, the intensity of the emotions, the amount of thinking that you had to do in regards to how do I survive this? How do I break open from this or find freedom from this? So it's going to take you a long, long time to come out and say, I am this way. Because you must have gone through a good number of steps, understanding the emotions, the past. And it usually is about 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. For some, it never happens. There is also this other tendency, which is quite organic, it's very difficult for you to raise your hand and you say, I just don't know. I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. And you have to just put yourself out there, because one of the 7 deadly sins, pride, it kind of forces you to assume that you know everything about everything under the sun. And when someone catches you, say, nah, Or you can be like Socrates. You get to be 70, and you kind of realize that first you have no idea what lives inside the soul of human beings, why they are the way they are. Then you get to be like Sigmund Freud, and you say human beings are far too complicated. There's a part to us that you will never have access to, you'll never understand. And then you have these psychological, biological urges that just come from nowhere. Our desire for anger and violence, for example, or sexual desires. And then, you move through life the first 50, 60 years of your life thinking that you know exactly where you're going, you know exactly what you're doing. And then you catch yourself realizing at a certain point that you have no idea what you've done for the past 60 years. And then you come to class and someone asks you, can we talk about vulnerability? You say, man, I don't really know what to talk about. I don't know. I mean, just before coming to class, I watched Anderson Cooper having a conversation with a nurse who just returned from Palestine. And, it makes this entire thing irrelevant. Your question's irrelevant. My responses to your question irrelevant. This entire system irrelevant. First because you really don't have any power over anything. The next earthquake, the next tornado, it can just happen from nowhere, And these days, every semester, I want to come to class and make sure the doors are locked while we are here because you don't know who's going to come in and with what. So you're always walking on eggshells. And someone asked, so can we talk about Socrates? What the hell do you care about Socrates, man? I don't know who Socrates is. That was like 3,000 years ago. What the hell do you want from me? Can I get an A? Yeah, I'll give you an A. Just get lost. And it's not because, I'm trying to disrespect you or dismiss you. The truth is, when you kind of understand the big picture a little and how insignificant, irrelevant, vulnerable we are really to all sorts of things, almost everything under the sun becomes useless. Yes. Useful, but useless, yes.
I guess I was going to try to ask you more about vulnerability versus culture. In America, we have kind of I would say, put people on a pedestal for being vulnerable. Say, oh, this person's vulnerable, that's a good thing. Do you see that in other cultures, or do you think that is Western, but specifically American?
I don't know. I have watched someone like Jordan Peterson come on TV and cry.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a psychologist, therapist, and I suppose it's his way of telling men, if you want to cry, just cry. It's okay. It's a little strange to me, but that's just me. Africa, many parts of Africa has been under stress, socially, politically, physically, for many, many hundreds, if not thousands of years. And yet, they are the sort of people who can just have a relatively healthy lifestyle. You have people from Afghanistan, from Iraq, from India. Life for them is somewhat disastrous. And yet the idea of you seeking therapy or doing drugs to the point that everything about your life, leads to paralysis, none of those things exist.
Are those trappings of the Western experience, or at least of American experience? I don't feel that Europe necessarily mirrors that.
Yeah, Europe doesn't do that.
Specifically from our...
Yeah, it's a great question.
Culture,
I don't know. I think in a culture where from the moment your child is born, where you kind of walk into Safeway and they're just crying, as a mother or father, you sit in the middle there and say, so, honey, tell me, what is going on with you? Let's talk about this. And so you kind of teach them from the age 2 that they are important, their feelings are important, and they should always be open to kind of just put everything out there for everyone to hear. And so in some ways, I suppose it's really good because it gives us a better understanding of human psychology, human culture. In other ways...
Do you think we're imprinting on our kids in that sense? That's what it is? Our own thing there?
I think right now... some months ago... we were on College Avenue, where Cole's Coffee is, Safeway, and Ike's. And so there was this woman who was sitting and drinking her coffee. She was minding her own business, and this other woman was passing by, and she punches her really, really hard in the face. And the woman, she must have been about 60 or 70, and she falls to the ground, And the cops are called, the woman is arrested, only to realize that she was suffering from some, mental disability of sorts. And what you realize is that you're really walking, being profoundly paranoid. You're paranoid about coming to class, not knowing who the next person is going to be walking in, and if they're walking in, are they walking with a gun, a knife, what can they, you know. And since all of us want to be on YouTube as a celebrity, you have no idea to what extent people are willing to harm others just to be on Oprah Winfrey or to be, you know, on Anderson Cooper's show. I think right now, any parent who has any care for their children, you look at the environment, you look at the school system, you look at just the forces of your society, and I suppose you also look at the way your life has turned out and you want the best for your kids. At least you want them to be better than you are. And from a very, very early on, you kind of place on your kids these crosses that they have to carry. And they have to kind of just be perfect from the moment they're born to the time that they die. And so there is this paranoia that all of us are walking with. And they're on the inside, they kind of express outwardly. And I'm not sure if there is a way out. Unless you just pack up and move to a different place, you know, with a completely different culture, narratives, software. That's the only way. I don't know. I mean, these are great questions about vulnerability, about culture, about, you know, I don't know what the answer is. I don't even know if there is an answer. All I know is that despite saying all this stuff, I'm not going to pack up and move to Iran. I'm not going to move to India. I did watch about 30 minutes of a video from Woodstock, a school I used to go to in India, 1977. And I was talking to my wife about maybe sending our kids there. It's, you know, it's about 20, 30,000 for each kid every semester. But, you know, it's a city, Missouri. It's kind of like San Luis Obispo. It sits on a hill. It's all forest. You see wild animals everywhere. They're very kind, though. And you say, well, it wouldn't be a bad idea for the kids to kind of have that experience for about 5, 6, 10 years and get to know the Indian culture a little bit, Indian values. And they're still very, very traditional, like Japan, to some extent. But again, despite talking about it and think about it, they'll never amount to action.
You mean
Yeah, I will never
you
send
won't
them. I won't send them.
So why fantasize about it? Why think about it like that?
Well, you fantasize about things because the place where you currently occupy is not completely satisfactory. You know, it is true that you may enjoy this class, but that doesn't keep you from looking at next semester's schedule because you do want to graduate, because we are futuristic animals. Despite having a pleasant time right now, there's a part of you that says, okay, 5 years from now, 2 months from now, that's how we are, you know. And it seems that discontent is something that you're born with. You know, I'm not the Buddha, nor am I Jesus Christ. I can't walk around saying, oh, you know, don't think about the past, don't think about the present, don't think about the future, live in the present. I mean, these are just foolish things to talk about and to say, you know. Anyways, yeah. Yeah.
Do you think it's a negative thing? For example, in India, we are frowned upon crying in public, or, you know, if I cry in house, I would be told, dismiss it, not willing to share it. Do you think it's...
I mean, there are pros and cons to everything. There was a guy in Iran, his name was Amir Kabir. The British had a heavy hand in Iran and just the way its politics and society turned out. The ruler at that time had a son whose name was Nader, and Amir Kabir was like the godfather in the sense that he would take care of this tiny kid. The ruler died, the son occupied the kingdom. He was now the king of Iran. But the British kept whispering into his ears over and over and over again that the guy who's raising you is evil, when in fact he was one of the best vice presidents Iran had ever had, Amir Kabir. From what little I know about Amir Kabir's life story and his awareness of the West's involvement in the Middle East, especially in Iran, only one time when he went home to have lunch with his wife, he just broke down. You know, I just think life is tough. If you can hold it together, it's good. If you have a parent who dies, there are some times that, if Nietzsche, I think, is right in suggesting that you can only combat life in two ways. You can either cry or you can laugh. You cry because things are just far too painful, or you laugh because you're just tired of crying and you have no idea what else to do and everything is just funny. You go to school, and you're good to your family, you do all sorts of things. And then you have a toothache, you go to the doctor and he says, oh, I'm sorry, it's not really a toothache, it's something else and you have cancer 4, stage 4. And you sit back and you say, this is really, really funny. I've been a vegan for the past 90 years and I've been good to everyone. Kind of like Job, You demand justice, but it doesn't come your way. And you kind of say, well, so what the hell? Why go to church if I'm eventually going to be, thrown into hell or purgatory? And you can laugh, that's one way to cope with it, or you can cry, And I don't think you should think of Shakespeare or Rumi or Albert Camus or Jean-Paul Sartre or Plato as happy chaps. I think these are profoundly miserable human beings who saw a lot, felt a lot, thought a lot, and the only way they could get rid of all the emotions that live inside them was to live in a room and just write. You have to feel bad for them. There are all these people around. Go, have a good time with them, drink with them, smoke with them, watch football with them. But no, you lock yourself in a room and you write about some of the most complicated things that human beings have to go through. I think because both laughter and tears, if of course they are related to very important and meaningful and things that have depth, I think they're very much like your physical body. You don't want to lay with just anyone, which means that you just don't want to cry in front of anyone and you don't want to laugh in front of anyone. Some of it, good morning, Abi, how are you? Some of it is just, part of what you do in society every day. I always go back to 2 books, Dialogues of Plato, and the New Testament, the 4 Gospels. Socrates, I don't think I have ever read, and I haven't read the book very closely. In fact, I haven't read the book at all. I've only listened to audios. I don't think I've ever read or heard anyone say that Socrates had a belly laugh. And you need to understand what a belly laughter is. A belly laughter is a sign that, at least in that particular moment in time, you have forgotten. That you have given yourself into a ridiculous joke, or I don't know, you just want to kind of just fit in, so you pretend and you do a belly laugh. But it is a sign of forgetfulness. And the fact that Socrates never has a belly laugh means he's a guy, at least, who is mostly aware, mostly mindful, looks around and sees the devastation around him. And then you have, at least the way Jesus has been portrayed in the Gospels, that he just never laughed, period. Maybe he had a smirk on his face, I don't really know. But this guy just never laughed because he didn't find human life, human experience, human journey, a happy experience. It was quite sorrowful and, miserable. But, these days, whatever floats your boat. You want to laugh every day? All the time, good for you. You want to cry? Well, do it in private. Anyone else? Yeah.
I think I may have saw the same video with it was Matthew Perry and his little brother. They were talking about drum cards and free will and all that.
I think it was Christopher Hitchens, maybe. That it's just a short,
It was a little 10-minute kind of debate. But anyway, I was kind of thinking about the choice components of addiction. Full-on disease or free will, or a little bit.
So, I think before talking about any kind of addiction, you have to understand that the sort of animals that we are, they gravitate towards anything that gives us pleasure. I just, enjoyed reading the dialogues when I was very, very young. If someone had asked me, well, is it because you want to major in philosophy? No, philosophy doesn't make money. you know? And by that, of course, then I wouldn't even know the value of money, but that's besides the point. And when I did, do philosophy, if someone asked me, do you want to go and teach? I said, no, I'm far too shy, far too reserved, far too incompetent. I have no business being in the classroom talking to anyone about anything. Now, your point is, I suppose, is at what stage does the pursuit of pleasure makes you an extremist, where you go to it all the time, If you remove the pleasure principle aspect from it, you're not going to become an addict to anything. So there has to be, whenever you gravitate towards something, you're getting a good amount of pleasure from it. Now, sometimes it's just pleasure without a history. Sometimes there's pleasure with a history. In other words, I am lonely. I don't really know what to do with myself. I go home, all I see are the four walls. It makes me feel really sad. I go out there, I find someone, they look attractive, I bring them home, and our bodies grind and I have a good time. Now, that particular pleasure has a background that Amir Sabzawar is lonely, sad, maybe even depressed, and this is his way of escaping. So sometimes you have pleasure because you want to escape some kinds of pain, and there is nothing wrong with that. I think the first thing before talking about any kind of addiction, human life is extremely difficult. I mean, in a single lifetime, you have to figure out what you want to major, how you want to make money, how you can buy a house, how to be a good son or a daughter, how to be a good companion, how to be a good father, figure out who you are, figure out if there is a God out there, if you have a soul out there. Now, these days, be mindful, be aware, breathe deeply and properly, all that junk that's out there. And you realize, well, who the hell can do all of that in a single lifetime? So the amount of pressure, and add to it, the social upheaval now. You have divorce on the rise, suicide on the rise, depression on the rise, loneliness on the rise. Everything is a mess. And you kind of sit back and you say, a single human being from the age 2, God forbid if they're now being raised in a single parent environment, or maybe, right now everything is dysfunctional, but that's besides the point. And you have on a single shoulder of a human being all the stuff that he or she has to kind of figure out. And it's too much.